3 women get cancer in their lifetimes. Towards the end of 1989, a great box of documents arrived at my office without any indication where they came from. And I opened them and found in it a complete set of Monsanto files, particularly a set of files dealing with toxicological testing of cows who've been given RBGH.
BST, trade name Posilac, is being used in more than a quarter of the dairy herds in the United States, according to Monsanto. The milk has been drunk by a large portion of the American population since the Food and Drug Administration declared it safe for both cows and humans 4 years ago.
And at that time, Monsanto was saying, there's no evidence whatsoever of any adverse effects, we don't use antibiotics, and this clearly showed that they had lied through their teeth. The files described areas of chronic inflammation in the heart, lung, kidney, spleen, also reproductive effects, also a whole series of other problems.
The most comprehensive independent assessment of the drug concludes that BST results in unnecessary pain, suffering and distress for the cows. This is not acceptable for a drug designed simply to increase milk production.
We began the worldwide opposition to BGH in the 1980s. It is a silly product. We have the industrial world is awash in milk. We're overproducing milk. We actually have governments around the world who pay farmers not to produce milk. So the first product Monsanto comes up with is a product that produces more of what we don't need.
Of course, you'll want to inject Posilac to every eligible cow, as each cow not treated is a lost income opportunity.
It sounded like a way to get more money out of each production unit. You know, they don't call them animals, these big corporate farms, they call them production units. And you can get more milk out of each production unit than you previously could. But the problem was that use of the artificial hormone caused all kinds of problems for the cows. It caused something called mastitis, which is a very painful infection of the udders. When you milk the cow, if the cow has bad mastitis, some of the, and I don't know how to say this in a, you know, I hope people aren't watching at dinner time, but the pus from the infection of the udders ends up in the milk, and the somatic cell count, they call it, the bacteria count inside your milk goes up.
There's a cost to the cows. The cows get sicker when they're injected with RBGH. They're injected with antibiotics. We know that people are consuming antibiotics through their food, and we know that that's contributing to antibiotic-resistant bacteria and diseases. And we know we're at a crisis when somebody can go into a hospital and get a staph infection and it can't be cured and they die. That's a crisis.
If we mistreat our fellow creatures, and if we stress them, and if we place them in factory farm conditions simply for short-term commercial gain for these companies, the diseases they get will then come into our bodies if we consume them. Bad for the cow, bad for the farmer, bad potentially for the consumer. The jury is out. We see a lot of conflicting evidence about potential health risks. And of course, as a consumer, my belief is, why should I take any risk?
Det är inte bara kor som har fötts upp med industriella metoder som blivit offer för Monsantos produkter. Stora områden i Vietnam avlövades av amerikanska armén med hjälp av Monsantos Agent Orange. Ett växtgift som anses ha orsakat mer än 50 000 fosterskador och hundratusentals cancerfall bland vietnamesiska civila och soldater, liksom bland amerikanska soldater som tjänstgjorde i Sydostasien. Till skillnad från de drabbade i Vietnam kunde USA-veteranerna som utsatts för Agent Orange stämma Monsanto. Företaget gick in i förlikning och betalade $80 miljoner i skadestånd. Men det erkände aldrig någon skuld.
sleeping in a motel in Brewer, Maine one night. I woke up with terrible hay fever and my eyes were burning, and I looked out of the river and there were great mounds of white foam going right down the river. And the next morning I got up and I said, my God, what was that happening last night? He said, oh, that's just the river. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, look, every night the paper companies send the stuff down the river. I said, what are you talking about? And he said, don't you understand? That's how we get rid of the effluent from the paper mills. Well, I knew at that time. I'd been in a business. I'd sold oil to the paper mills. I knew all the owners. I'd been in politics. I knew the people in the towns. I knew not one constituent of the paper mills wanted to have the river polluted. And yet here the river was being polluted. And it was more or less as if we created a doom machine. In our search for wealth and for prosperity, we created something that was going to destroy us.
The traders who are involved in the market are not guys whose moral fiber when it comes to environmental conditions are going to be rattled at all. They're seeing dollars and they're making money. There are no markets that you'll not trade because of, how you feel about it. No. Brokers don't stay away from copper because it violates their religious beliefs or their environmental policies. No. There are times when you think about it, but it's fleeting. It really is a fleeting moment. It's like, well, the town's being polluted down there in Peru, but hey, this guy needs to buy some copper. I'm getting paid a commission too. If we were more, educated on what's really going on in third world countries with the production of these things, and obviously I think, there might be, a bigger movement. There might be more of a, moral struggle. But right now, we don't know. Our information that we receive does not include anything about the environmental conditions. Because until the environmental conditions become a commodity themselves or are being traded, then obviously we will not have anything to do with that. It doesn't come into our psyche at all. If suddenly we have clean air is now a commodity, then of course, hey, they're polluting it down in Peru, that one is going down. There's a difference. But as it stands right now, that's not yet a factor. It's not yet become a commodity, so we're not thinking about that, and we don't have any reason to, because it's so far away, and you hardly hear anything about it. I mean, keep in mind, there are things going on right in our backyards, for God's sake. We trade live hogs. There's so many pigs in the state of Carolina that is polluting the rivers, but how often do you find out about that?
At Multinational Monitor, we put together a list of the top corporate criminals of the 1990s. We went back and looked at all of the criminal fines that corporations had paid in the decade. Exxon pled guilty in connection to federal criminal charges with the Valdez spill and paid $125 million in criminal fines. General Electric was guilty of defrauding the federal government and paid $9.5 million in criminal fines. Chevron was guilty of environmental violations and paid $6.5 million in fines. Mitsubishi was guilty of antitrust violations and paid $1.8 million in fines. IBM was guilty of illegal exports and paid $8.5 million. Was guilty of environmental violations. Pfizer, the drug manufacturer, was guilty of antitrust violations and was guilty of food and drug regulatory violations. Sears was guilty of financial fraud. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois. Unical was guilty of fraud and environmental violations. Georgia Korean Airlines paid finance violations. Paid $250,000 in criminal LaRouche, guilty of an antitrust violation. Paid $500 million in criminal fines.
Again and again, we have the problem that whether you obey the law or not is a matter whether it's cost effective. If the chance of getting caught and the penalty are less than it costs to comply, people think of it as being just a business decision.
Drawing the metaphor of the early attempts to fly. The man going off of a very high cliff in his airplane with the wings flapping, and the guy is flapping the wings, and the wind is in his face, and this poor fool thinks he's flying, but in fact he's in free fall, and he just doesn't know it yet because the ground is so far away. But of course, the craft is doomed to crash. That's the way our civilization is. The very high cliff represents the virtually unlimited resources we seem to have when we began this journey. The craft isn't flying because it's not built according to the laws of aerodynamics, and it's subject to the law of gravity. Our civilization is not flying because it's not built according to the laws of aerodynamics for civilizations that would fly. And of course, the ground is still a long way away, but some people have seen that ground rushing up sooner than the rest of us have. The visionaries have seen it and have told us it's coming. There's not a single scientific peer-reviewed paper published in the last 25 years that would contradict this scenario. Every living system of Earth is in decline. Every life support system of Earth is in decline. And these together constitute the biosphere that supports and nurtures all of life, and not just our life, but perhaps 30 million other species that share this planet with us. The typical company of the 20th century, extractive, wasteful, abusive, linear in all of its processes, taking from the earth, making, wasting, sending its products back to the biosphere, waste to a landfill. I myself was amazed to learn just how much stuff the earth has to produce through our extraction process to produce $1 of revenue for our company. When I learned, I was flabbergasted. We're leaving a terrible legacy of poison and diminishment of the environment for our grandchildren's grandchildren, generations not yet born. Some people have called that intergenerational tyranny, a form of taxation without representation levied by us on generations yet to be. It's the wrong thing to do.
One of the questions that comes up periodically is to what extent could a corporation be considered to be psychopathic? And if we look at a corporation as a legal person, that it may not be that difficult to actually draw the transition between psychopathy in the individual to psychopathy in a corporation. We can go through the characteristics that define this particular disorder one by one and see how they might apply to corporations. They would have all the characteristics. And in fact, in many respects, a corporation of that sort is the prototypical psychopath.
Om vår tids dominerande maktapparat skapats till att likna en psykopat, vem bär då ansvaret för dess handlingar?
Can a building have moral opinions? Can a building have social responsibility? If a building can't have social responsibility, what does it mean to say that a corporation can? A corporation is simply an artificial legal structure. But the people who are engaged in it, whether the stockholders, whether the executives in it, whether the employees, they all have moral responsibilities.
It's a fair assumption that every human being, real human beings, flesh and blood ones, not corporations, but every flesh and blood human being is a moral person. You know, we've got the same genes, we're more or less the same, but our nature, the nature of humans, allows all kinds of behavior. I mean, every one of us, under some circumstances, could be, a gas chamber attendant and a saint. You know, depends on all sorts of things.
If you're working in a for-profit company in the Anglo-American system of capitalism, your principal obligation is to work for the long-term economic interests of the owners of the business. inevitably there'll be conflicts between that obligation and your own values and commitments. No job, in my experience with Goodyear, has been as frustrating as the CEO job. Because even though the perception is that you have absolute power to do whatever you want, the reality is you don't have that power. Sometimes, if you had really a free hand, if you really did what you wanted to do that suits your personal thoughts and your personal priorities, you'd act differently. But as a CEO, you cannot do that. Layoffs have become so widespread that people tend to believe that CEOs make these decisions without any consideration to the human implications of their decisions. It is never a decision that any CEO makes lightly. It is a tough decision. But it is the consequence of modern capitalism.
When you look at a corporation, just like when you look at a slave owner, you want to distinguish between the institution and the individual. So slavery, for example, or other forms of tyranny are inherently monstrous. But the individuals participating in them may be the nicest guys you can imagine. Benevolent, friendly, nice to their children, even nice to their slaves, caring about other people. I mean, as individuals, they may be anything. As in their institutional role, they're monsters because the institution's monstrous. And the same is true here.
My wife and I, some years ago, had at our home a demonstration. 25 people arrived. They hung a big banner on the top of our house saying murderers. They danced around outside in gas masks and so on.
Yes. How are you? My name's John. How are you? Well, you're not looking at me when you say it. You have to be a little bit careful because I'm very sensitive to people who are not friendly.
Hello.
Okay. Did you notice you being recorded and filmed?
No, I didn't.
No. Well, I think
you'll see yourself on television.
Would it be polite to mention, wouldn't it? I mean, here we are.
We're not politeness. This man is involved in a corporation which is funding directly police, which this corporation has admitted.
Who is a corporation?
A corporation is an organisation of individuals, and this individual is part of that corporation. So he's responsible for the act.
As a public demonstration, it wasn't very effective. There were only two. This is a very rural area, 2 people and a dog, and it's not a very big house, which I think rather surprised them. But then we sat down and talked to them for a couple of hours, and we gave them tea and coffee, and they had lunch on our lawn.
Right. Well, there's another coffee coming. There's no. Who wanted? Sorry about the soya. Anyway, I've not put milk in.
No need for you to be deceitful. Why didn't you just ask me whether I was in?
Hello, can we hang a murderer's banner up?
But for previous experience, they'd probably be slightly more police here.
They were terribly upset about it. After about 20 minutes, they said, well, the problem's not you, it's Shell. So I said, no, wait a minute, let's talk about what is Shell. It's made up of people like me. In the end, what we found in that discussion was all the things that they were worried about, I was worried about as well. Climate, oppressive regimes, human rights. The big difference between us was I feel that I actually can make a contribution to this. These people were frustrated because they felt they had nothing to do.
So an individual CEO, let's say, may really care about the environment. And in fact, since they have such extraordinary resources, they can even devote some of their resources to that without violating their responsibility to be totally inhuman. But of course, within limits. The institution allows only a certain amount.
Herrskapet Marty Stewart kan därför bjuda aktivisterna på te samtidigt som Shell i Nigeria bränner av enorma mängder med gas. Vilket gör bolaget till en av världens största källor till förorening av miljön. Och all denna uttalade oro för miljön hindrar inte att Ken Saro-Wiwa och 8 andra aktivister hängs för att de har motsatt sig Shells miljöpolitik i Nigerdeltat.
Corporation is not a person, it doesn't think. People in it think. And for them, it is legitimate to create terminator technology so that farmers are not able to save their seeds. seeds that will destroy themselves through a suicide gene, seeds that are designed to only produce crop in one season. You really need to have a brutal mind. It's a war against evolution to even think in those terms. But quite clearly, profits are so much higher in their minds.
The profit motive, which drove Fudsy to accomplish so much, may bring out the evil as well as the good.
Hi, I'm Michael Moore, the Roger and Me guy. I make over 6 figures a year. I guess you could say I'm doing pretty well.
The fact that most of these companies are run by white men, white rich men, means that they are out of touch with what the majority of the world is. Because the majority of this planet are not a bunch of rich white guys. They're people of other colors. They're the majority. Women are the majority. And the poor and working poor make up the majority of this planet. So the decisions that they make come from not the reality that exists throughout the world.
How much is enough? You know, how much is enough? If you are a billionaire, would it be okay just to be a half a billionaire? Wouldn't it be okay for your company to make a little less money if it meant...
When I bought those 2 airplane tickets for Phil Knight and myself to fly to Indonesia, I was prepared for him to say, okay, let's go.
Sunday.
Oh, no, not a chance.
Huh?
Not a chance.
No?
No, but...
They're transferable. I can change it to another day.
No.
And call me on it. Call my bluff. And he's a smart guy. I mean, he's not stupid. And so I thought, okay, get ready for this. Especially because, you know, I bought first class tickets, so, you know, it'd be a comfortable ride at least, you know. And of course, he tells me then on camera...
I've never been to Indonesia.
I'm like taken aback by this. I can't believe that the guy who's the head of the company has never walked through his own factories.
Oh, you've got to go.
No, I can't go between now and the rest of this year.
When we were done filming, he calls me up a couple weeks later and he goes, I may have a chance to go there with you to the factories. I'm going to the Australian Open to watch some tennis. And, you know, maybe I can get up there, or at least you can go there. Would you like to go to the Australian Open?
For 21 years, I never gave a thought to what we were taking from the earth or doing to the earth in the making of our products. And then in the summer of 1994, we began to hear questions from our customers we'd never heard before. What's your company doing for the environment? And we didn't have answers. The real answer was not very much. And it really disturbed many of our people, not me so much as them. And a group in our research department decided to convene a task force and bring people from our businesses around the world to come together to assess our company's worldwide environmental position, to begin to frame answers for those customers. They asked me if I would come and speak to that group and give them a kickoff speech to launch this new task force with an environmental vision. And I didn't have an environmental vision. I did not want to make that speech. And at sort of the propitious moment, this book landed on my desk. It was Paul Hawkins' book, The Ecology of Commerce. And I began to read The Ecology of Commerce, really desperate for inspiration. And very quickly into that book, I found the phrase, the death of birth. It was E.O. Wilson's expression for species extinction, the death of birth, and it was a point of a spear into my chest. And I read on, and the spear went deeper, and it became an epiphanal experience, a total change of mindset for myself, and a change of paradigm. Can any product be made sustainably? Well, not any and every product. Can you make landmines sustainably? Well, I don't think so. There's a more fundamental question than that about landmines. Some products ought not be made at all. Unless we can make carpets sustainably, you know, perhaps we don't have a place in a sustainable world, but neither does anybody else making products unsustainably. One day early in this journey, it dawned on me that the way I've been running Interface is the way of the plunderer. Plundering something that's not mine, something that belongs to every creature on earth. And I said to myself, my goodness, the day must come when this is illegal, that when plundering is not allowed. I mean, it must come. So I said to myself, my goodness, someday people like me will end up in jail. The largest institution on earth, the wealthiest, the most powerful, the most pervasive, the most influential, is the institution of business and industry, the corporation, which also is the current present-day instrument of destruction. It must change.
I del 2 av serien studerar vi bolagens bestämda avsikt att tränga in i och bemäktiga sig allt de kommer i kontakt med. Från massmediepublikens medvetenhet till barnets försvarslösa psyke. Från atmosfärens yttersta gränser till vårt DNAs innersta djup.